Anyways, welcome to the Boston Office 365 user group. I am Egon Spang. No, I'm just kidding. I'm David Pileggi. I am one of the coordinators. In fact, let me introduce you to all the coordinators. That is a lovely scene there. Wow, that's amazing. All right.
Still got a new headshot.
So Dimitri is in travel mode right now, so he's not able to join us this evening. Bill is with us as well as myself. If you have questions, concerns, and comments, because Dimitri's not here, ask Dimitri. All right, for the agenda, we're going to go through some updates, do a sponsor highlight really quick, because let's face it, if you're here in person, all the pizza's been taken care of, and it looks like we chose wisely this time. There's a lot of happy faces, so that's good. Followed by the feature speaker, which is Richard Harbridge today. Followed in, after that, QA, community chat, et cetera, yada, 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 and so forth. All right. And chicken dinner. Oh, that's right. Previous session was crafting content with AI, human insight meets machine intelligence. It was presented by Christian Buckley. It was an amazing presentation. Is it on YouTube already? It's already on YouTube, so go ahead and check out the Boston 0365 group on YouTube. We have our own channel. Check that out. It was really worth the watch. All right, let's go through update. I'm going to have a field day with this one.
That's fun.
All right. Starting with something easy, something lighthearted. So one of the things I noticed in our tenant, take a look in your tenant. If you go into Microsoft Teams, you go into the calendar, you go to the drop down next to create new meeting, you'll have, for some of you, several new options. One of them is Town Hall. Think of Town Hall as you're not broadcasting to the entire planet, but you have a large group of individuals. So instead of an all hands, let's say you have a company of 10,000 people, you're not doing an all hands for the entire company, but for a large part of your organization, 50%, Town Hall might be the solution for you. If it's not in there now, it's going to be there by the end of October. Keep an eye out for that. Enhanced query suggestions when searching for people. This is something I always really liked. The fact that it's now in Teams is awesome. I'm sure Richard could definitely chime in on this one as well, but the long and the short of it is one of my favorite things back when SharePoint 2007, so Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, known as MOS, came out, and followed by that, with the profiles that you were able to create, you could actually do people search, and you could search for the word SharePoint, and if that was a skill that they put in there, they would still find the person. So this is something that's really exciting to me, to be able to actually do that, but it goes above and beyond. You can also see in this image, it goes into chats. It's going into, it looks like a PowerPoint presentation, stuff like that. So you will have enhanced query to look for your people. It's always a good thing. I've always recommended it.
Does that mean that I can finally search for the company name for contacts that don't have a person associated in my personal Outlook contacts?
I think this starts by the person, identifies the person, and then it searches within that scope.
Yeah.
So this refines your scope by the person. There may be, a feature for a company name. I don't know, but right now this is one that they talked about.
It's maddening.
Yeah.
It's something that when it comes out, the first thing I'll end up doing is actually searching.
Already, Link had it.
True. And it's something that would be definitely interesting to play around with. I kind of hope so, because technically a name of a company would be associated with a person as well, but vice versa. Yeah, that's something to be seen. All right, this one, I nearly lost my mind seeing this. For those of you who may or may not have seen it, we had a security incident back at the end of last year. And so this is something that you definitely want to kind of keep an eye on. This allows, or removes the ability for Microsoft Teams to get your voice and face recognition biometrics and actually learn from it. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Richard, feel free to correct me if I'm off base on this.
What does it do with that?
So when I'm in a meeting and I have this turned on, over time, and someone turns on transcription, for example, and I have a camera and it's shooting me, it'll actually recognize my face so that when I'm talking, it'll say David Pileggi, and the transcript is speaking at this time, and will actually attach my name to it. Vice versa, the voice part of it will do the same thing. It'll actually start taking voice print patterns of my voice and actually recognize, okay, David Pileggi is speaking. I'm going to, in the transcript, put that down.
And then it does that, so conduct another meeting where it's just a video of you, the AI generated that you, the next meeting is run by David Pileggi.
I mean, I guess that would be a possibility. The thing that concerns me is where the data is being kept. Is the biometrics just in Teams, like in my user data, or is it in the cloud? The chances are highly likely, because Teams is cross-platform, it's going to be in the cloud. So it's just something to consider. I personally am probably going to absolutely remove it for both cases, because I don't. Go ahead, Richard.
I don't know if it helps, but yeah. So so what this is voice and face recognition stuff, and like you can have like audio cues with different people and highlights, etc. So that model of the way they use it stores in the geo that you're located in. So if you're in European Union, it'll stay in European Union. The retention is 14 days, basically, and it's encrypted within that tenant, that organization. If a user leaves the organization, then immediately the customer data is deleted according to the customer data retention policy for the user. So there's a lot of admin stuff. A lot of it's unfortunately PowerShell, but you can control a lot of it. And then the problem in certain regions in the world, the reason this is there is because admins can do data exports, but end users can't, and that's a no-no for patterns like this. So this is closing a gap on the compliance side.
Interesting.
Plus, if you have your microphone on, you're in a noisy office, it'll be able to listen to your voice and downplay the other voices.
Correct. My favorite one that most people don't know about, and if you've never used it, there's this spatial sense. I can't remember if it's preview yet still, but it's supposed to be in the product by now. And so what it is like if you have like audio with multiple speakers or headphones or whatever, it'll put the audio of different speakers in different kind of spatial positions, and then that way you get less fatigued because you can kind of track like who's speaking without. It's a weird thing. Like mentally, you're connecting like this speaker is over on my left, even though they're not. So it creates that cohesion. So there's a bunch of like little features like that all rely on it as well. Yeah.
So there's a lot involved, but so you have to kind of weigh the pros and the cons, just like everything else. It's just something that you want to be aware of, and that is going to be something you can actually turn on or off, which also probably is thanks to the European Union, I'm guessing, Richard, as well.
Almost everything in privacy is California and Europe. So thank you to both of them.
Nice. So SharePoint alignment, believe it or not, enhancements to the text web part. Finally, you don't have to go back to a classic page to actually make it look good anymore. Well, okay, I lied, but we'll go with that. In this, you'll be able to actually control the spacing between paragraphs versus titles versus, what is it? Like title characters?
Colors.
It's just in colors.
Oh yeah, colors too. Yay. So they're starting to slowly catch up to the classic pages. Of course, because it's mobile reactive, plus there's a lot of other things behind the scenes. Some of the things are going to be a little more difficult for them to actually initialize. Hopefully, they're going to get a little bit closer to a finer balance and being able to actually build web pages the way you want to. All right, tenant allow block list will support IPv6 allow and block entries. I'm hearing snickering. especially with the exploits the IP version 6 had, and the, let's say, quick hot fixing and hot patches that came out. It's something, I think there's a lot of work to still be done, but at least Microsoft is trying to push in that direction.
Put that one in there for fun.
For fun.
He's still there.
Gee, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, did I skip one? No, I didn't. Okay.
That's it.
A huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Turn Digital. For those of you here in person, you guys got that. One of the two. And with that, the main event. Communication in the AI-driven digital workplace with Microsoft 365, presented by my good friend, Richard Harbridge. Richard, if you want to go ahead and take over, feel free. And
Sweet.
Take her away whenever you're comfortable.
All right, you guys make noise anytime you have questions. Yeah, I like interaction, and I have way too much content, so we don't need to cover 90% of it, and we're still probably good. So I'll share my screen. Let me know if you guys see it.
We see it.
Sweet, beautiful. Well, first of all, thanks so much for your time and attention. This will be recorded, so you can always look at it there because I do talk quickly and I've got a fly flying around my head. Second thing for reference is the slide deck I'll provide for the organizers, and you guys can share it however you want. But if anyone wants them, feel free to reach out, including all the hidden slides that I ended up cutting. It is 185 slides, I think, still, but don't worry, we'll skip whole sections probably today. The goal for this is I just really want to talk about, there's sort of three lenses when we think of modern work today, and there's sort of comms, collab, and management experiences and how we work. And I wanted to really emphasize communication and how that's changing in modern digital workplaces that are using Copilot from Microsoft 365, as well as other AI features. So that's what I wanted to come and talk about. When I'm not doing things like this, I'm doing technology roadmaps and things like that with customers. And a lot of the insights and context I'll be providing today is based on, our team that does hundreds of intranets and Microsoft 365 like communication-oriented projects. And then we also have been really lucky. We've done over 100 AI transformation projects, including many Copilot pilots and programs like that with customers. So hopefully, as you guys ask questions or whatever, I can give you a real world context of like how it really works and where the fundamental challenges are. So with that, I will just dive right in. So first thing I wanted to talk about is what we're hearing. So there's the first big challenge is that Copilot and AI are becoming a bit synonymous in the Microsoft stack. And so when we think of AI workloads that are AI intent, that means you're using AI intentionally. Often we call that Copilot something. And then when you are just using AI, but you don't realize you're using AI, you're just using the normal products that you've always used. It just has an AI capability built in. And so even just navigating that Copilot ecosystem is very challenging. Copilot from Microsoft 365 is now called Microsoft 365 Copilot. Many people aren't aware, like Microsoft Forms, a bunch of other capabilities fit under this. So, the picture is always changing in terms of what is in scope, and new capabilities are being released regularly. And so it's really hard to parse this. Now, imagine for a moment, if you're a corporate comms leader or you're a person, just trying to advance the communications landscape of your digital workplace, how challenging it is for you to navigate this extra layer on top of your normal day-to-day. And that's really what I want to build, is a little bit more confidence on what are the parts of the AI journey that are relevant, and that might be things that you should take a little bit more time and look at, and what are the ones that are very actionable now, and what are the ones maybe to look for in the future. So that's what we'll be doing today. If you do have questions about any of these other ones, feel free to share them either online on the IMs or in the discussion. We can always have a little digression. The other big challenge is that when we think of communications, for most of us, our digital workplace has a center grounding, and that's our intranets, right? Historically, our digital hub of our digital workplace has been our intranet, and those have gone through iterations. We're no strangers to transformation or significant change. But there is a difference in specifically intranets today. One, the intranet is not a place you go It's a thing that comes to you. So the content, the services, the things that intranets do should come to you in the flow of your work. And that's why things like Viva Connections and the Teams integration is a good starting point, but there's a lot more that we can do there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with Viva Amplify and other things Microsoft's doing, as well as just tactics that customers do. The second thing to understand is that we are in a new paradigm in terms of expectations, and we'll come back to this. And so these experiences around communications, finding what I need, parsing information, it needs to be more intelligent. It needs to be more hyper-personalized is the term that I'm going to use instead of just normal personalization. And it needs to be more predictive, kind of recommending things to me in the right context and situation. So those are things that many organizations are still struggling to kind of grasp and tackle. And that's arguably something that's been around for a while, a lot of the patterns I've just described. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to catch up there. The second thing to understand is that there's different stakeholders internally in organizations that typically drive what we consider communications excellence. So you've got human resources who might, some organizations, since you might not have a corporate comms group, might be the de facto owners of something like your intranet, or they might have the most active departmental site. You've got, of course, IT, which all of us are intimately familiar with. And then we, of course, have communications and other groups like that, maybe marketing, depending on the size of the org. So I wanted to talk briefly about what human resources has gone through, because it's been a big journey for human resources from hiring and policy enforcement and things like that. They shifted into employee engagement over the years. This has been a big shift for HR leaders. And then HR teams have gotten really into employee experiences now because we need to retain talent, optimize talent. There's a lot of retraining with AI skilling and other things that keep them very busy. So human resources has really shifted away from just like hiring, firing, and policies to a mix of things to really get more out of an employee's experience and by proxy their performance, their engagement, and other activities there. And so this term for this generally is employee experience, and you'll hear me use that term a couple times today because I think it's really important as a catch-all to describe how an employee experiences their digital employee experience, and we're going to have a big impact on that in the communications lens. So that's all the ways in which an employee communicates with others or receives communication, et cetera. That's what we'll talk about. The other one is, traditional communications departments and larger organizations have gone through a big shift. So in the pandemic, it's great. A lot of them got a little bit more of a shot in the arm because, this transition to hybrid and then remote work led to a lot more digital demand in terms of content and support. However, important to understand that they've also gone through their own journey from editing and publishing, and there are still comms departments that work this way. And if you are kind of, it's like an IT department that thinks of servers and projects instead of services and programs and proactive IT versus reactive, et cetera. So each department has gone through transformation, driven a lot by industry trends and technology changes. And so communications is no stranger to that. So editing and publishing is where they started, and now they're shifting more and more to enablement and connecting. And specifically where we want to be in 2025 and for this year is we really want to be focusing on amplifying good communications across the organization, improving overall communications, and I'll give you a couple ideas on how to pitch that, and then of course improving employee engagement, but specifically engaging around communications. So those are really important distinctions, and you can kind of tell when we talk to customers where their maturity is, because if they're really focusing on just editing and publishing, then they've got a long way to go to get towards this amplification and really taking responsibility for improving communication over the whole org versus an organization that's just about taking leadership messaging and things like that and aligning the org. Those are very different outcomes. You can do both, but you want to do both. You want to make sure you're doing the other side of that equation as well. Another way to think about this is instead of thinking of intranets 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, whatever we're at now, is to say that, hey, we go through big transformations like this. So is there a difference with this AI transformation than previous ones we've done before, like enterprise social transformations and their impact, or personalization and integration, or even just the impact things like Microsoft Teams had on the internet experience? And the answer here is yes, it is different. So let's kind of talk about why it's different. The first thing to note is in executive boardrooms, which I'm very lucky to still do a lot of these, in a lot of boardrooms, the very important discussion we have to have is that this technology shift is too important to leave in the hands of IT or technologists alone. It's really important for the business to lead this because of the impact of it. The way exponential technologies work is they continue to climb in an exponential way. And so we as an organization have to adapt differently than we would to most technologies. And if you think about it, I'm not saying it's linear like this. Think of it more of a step graph. So what we have is, you have, let's talk about the pandemic. So before the pandemic, everyone needed to hybrid work, right? So we had mobile experiences, we had, different ways in which you could communicate and work. And then, those are each step. So we release Teams and everyone has access to Teams. Then what we do for hybrid work is we release a new modern intranet that's based on SharePoint Online, maybe Viva Connections. That's another step up. And organizations that have made that climb, when the pandemic hit, right? And everyone had to immediately jump up in terms of their capability. Many organizations had a less steep curve that they now needed to grade, right? They could make that bridge themselves. Some organizations that were, a little bit behind, they had a much steeper curve and a much harder time. And we all were digital first responders, but those organizations would struggle more. It's like the pandemic, except we can see that line coming. Unlike the pandemic where we couldn't have predicted when that was going to immediately happen, now we see it. And it is, I want to be really clear, I truly believe this. I think in 2025, by the end of 2025, you should be well on this curve. It is not a linear curve and it's not a single step up. It's going to keep going up. And so we need to change how we work. We'll talk about that. And we need to start bridging as soon as possible. So let me put it a different way. In most technology shifts that we've had, and we've had lots of these, the way that technology impacts us is it changes how we work. It changes the nature of how we work. It creates new opportunities, entirely new business categories, and it drastically changes the ways and modalities in which we communicate. However, all these changes happened over generations or over decades. In fact, even the internet era and the mobile era, arguably the app era around it as well, both happened over 10 plus years. It took like 5 years just to have hotels to have Wi-Fi. Like there's all these reasons why these things were delayed. The AI change is in years, not decades. And this is really an important distinction because businesses aren't really designed to adapt to changes like this in years. Businesses are designed to adapt over, 3 to 5 years or, maybe even decades, depending on the type of business. And so this is a big shift for leaders. It's a big shift for everyone in an org as they adapt to it, and especially for those who are trying to lead people's improvements here. Another way to think about this new work perspective is whether it's Copilot or other tools, what we're really trying to do is remove skill barriers and allow more people to participate and more people to be more excellent. There's a really pronounced impact, if I had more time I'd explain it, around lower skilled, especially digitally skilled workers, get more benefit out of things like Copilot. So what we're doing right now is we're seeing this big shift where a lot of our transformation, a lot of the opportunities in organizations are being driven by employees who often didn't have as much of their work, if not digitized, represented in these types of changes. And just to kind of put it in perspective, sometimes people go, oh, like LLMs are just, chats, like it's just text language-based models. The thing to understand is that our whole work environment is just text. It's numbers and it's text. You take input and you put it into an order operating system, and that's text. It translates into invoices. Like everything we do creates text. That is by far the vast majority of how we work today. And so a technology that can generalize that and be what we call a generalized digital assistant in that space has a really significant impact. We'll talk more about that today in the comms perspective, but again, if you guys have questions, happy to answer, my perspectives on this. So again, measured in years, not decades, and that's the big difference. So we have to adapt to this change much faster. Now, there's another problem with comms, and you guys have all felt it, right? Like think of how many people you communicate with a day. If you think about it, over 10 years ago, you would only communicate with X people. On average, it was around 10 people in a day, and you would collaborate with about 10 people in a day. And now, for most people, the statistical average is like 25 to 30 people a day. You communicate with a lot more people. You do it a lot more frequently, and this leads to all sorts of different types of consequences. Essentially, especially with AI, but in general with these technology shifts, we expect more. We expect people to be more communicative to us. We expect our partners, our customers, our employees, our customers expect it from us. So we all have these greater and greater expectations. Yet at the same time, everyone will say the same thing. We also feel more overwhelmed now than perhaps we did before. And so this is the delta that we're really trying to tackle. And this is because there's ever increasing volume, variety, and velocity in the ways in which we communicate, right? And that makes it very, very challenging. So let's kind of talk through this in a different way. what do people want? They want communication to be more proactive. They want communication to be more accurate. They want it to be more timely. Kind of goes with proactive. They want it to be more personalized. They want it to be, more comprehensive. They want it to be more interactive, and so on and so forth. And these require us to not just change how we communicate, but change the technology landscape in which empowers us as organizations and employees to do that. And that's really at the cusp of this. So you take this challenge and you combine it, right, with that AI challenge, and you start to see where this is a big, big thing that we need to tackle together. And I've got lots of data points. I tried to simplify it to one slide, but essentially, again, you can pick any lens, interruptions, number of communication tools, number of emails, number of chat messages is a really fun one I had to take out because I just had too many slides. But there's all this wonderful, rich data out there that shows it's just getting harder. It's more communication than ever before. And it's crazy that emails, especially I find this interesting, the emails keep increasing when we had the promise of social, right? Enterprise social. We had the promise of Teams. We've got the promise of Loop. We got the promise of all these technologies, right? And yet the amount of communication we're doing is new and more. And Copilot pages is just going to keep adding to that. The reality is comms, again, volume, variety, and velocity keeps increasing. So we have to adapt and change.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, please.
Just out of curiosity, from your perspective, one of the things that I've looked at, looking at what you're showing right now, do you think that this is the cause of, especially after the pandemic, basically a lot of companies downsized, they really haven't had an economy to scale back upwards, and so therefore there's more on everybody's plate. So people are wearing a lot more hats, but at the same time, there's more information that has to go out because there's more demand.
So I think we have consumer expectations are increasing, and then we have, by proxy customer, because many B2B orgs are still B2C reliant on the other end of the chain. You have, employees that work differently, they communicate differently at home, right? And many of them are using these AI tools when they communicate with family, friends, et cetera. So you have a bunch of, we'll call them external factors, and then you have internal factors too, right? In order to be competitive, we often need to communicate faster, better, and more effectively. And so those two things drive it. Now, here's the thing. If we think of comms departments, let's go back to the earlier visual, and this is a real pattern and problem. A comms department that thinks of them as an intranet owner and an editor and publisher is missing the whole opportunity with comms, right? Because there are real stark differences. The comms departments that have way more budget, at least in my anecdotal and professional experience, are the ones that are like, we are trying to improve comms across the org. We're trying to improve communications outcomes. We're trying to improve all those things, not just PR, not just alignment, but a bunch of other factors. And those organizations get more funding because they're leading things like the AI transformation and rollout, right alongside HR, right alongside IT. They're very active in that versus like relegated to just, I manage this intranet or page. And so that's the mindset shift that's really important for leaders. And then from a departmental perspective, that means you need to rethink like the services you offer, like how you deliver things. And so going back to like economic impacts, what we find is during recessions, during which, you can predict one every year, depending on the election cycle, I'm sure we'll probably have one at some point, maybe next year in the US. When there's a recession, you typically see that technology spend on some of these categories, it stabilizes or increases. So I actually don't think it's going to be like the kind of shrink there. I will say that employee experience is on the low in investment compared to things like AI, and a lot of that is a misunderstanding of how you scale your competitive differentiation in AI. So the way I would describe that, a lot of and I'm just generalizing a lot of executives, and I don't mean to be cynical. I know this is recorded, but it's a real pattern. There's a lot of executives who look at these AI opportunities and they go, "Great, we can reduce our staff because that's one of our highest cost headcounts," right? And when you think of like the operational budgets. And the thing is your competitive advantage isn't, your capital P processes. It's not, those, your products and things like that in the capital P sense. It's the ways people bridge between those things. So when you think of the experience on a customer side and they purchase something and then you go through all these different steps in the process, it's when humans are in the mix in your organization that's both, the exception, the most costly part of it, but it's also where you get competitive differentiation. And some organizations believe in that, and they believe in the value of generalized assistants helping people perform better, which means the more staff you have who go through that transformation, the more you have not just resilience and agility, but the more ways in which you can improve in novel and interesting and innovative ways some of those processes to create stronger competitive differentiation. But that's basically the argument. Do we see this as AI is going to help us, kind of improve profits while reducing some of the costs, including staff? Or do we see this as, yes, it can do that while also enabling us, again, if we think of multiple year journeys, really getting more out of this? Because the organizations that keep their staff in the same two organizations and they enable them with Copilot and these generalized assistants and they become more capable, that organization should be more competitively advantaged than the other organization in just a short amount of time. And the reason for that is because and we've all seen this, the people who know how to improve the process, these lowercase p processes, are the people working on it day to day. And when you empower them with these types of AI tools, not only do we digitize it, but we give them ways in which they can scale using AI. And remember, this is an exponential scale. So there's a multiplier effect that's very different there, or a compounding effect. And so I'm trying to simplify. I have a million slides for this, but I'm trying to simplify it down. That's what I think is the big difference. And so going back to the comms, it's all about do they understand the opportunity and the right way to frame it? And do they believe in low code, lowercase p processes, generalized digital assistants, or do they believe in those capital P processes only? And if you just believe in the capital P, it's an uphill battle. And I'll give you some tactics on improving it, but that's an organization that's always going to try and cut if they can, right? Because you have to believe in the differentiation of your people and the lowercase p processes closer to them, that bridges between the ERP system and the CRM system, or the bridges between, the person who makes that order on the front end to the person who puts it on the truck, in the warehouse on the back end. And again, one last comment on this. Sorry, it's just a fun digression. If you talk to CEOs and business transformation leaders, CTOs, et cetera, and you say, do you think of your responsibility starting from that order when you go on the website and use this all the way to when that person ships it? Or do you think of the opportunity that you're missing, which is before they order it and, all the way to the kitchen or something where they unpack and use that device, right, on a day-to-day basis? And the organizations that look at that whole tail and see all the ways in which they can be a participant in that and make a bunch of money in those different situations are the organizations that are getting more out of AI, because there's more ways it can improve those parts of the process. And this goes back into a data discussion as well. So a lot of context there, but hopefully some of those things made sense, and it gives a bit of rationale of why I'm highlighting these particular patterns, because they're really important, and why some organizations will struggle more to adapt some of these challenges versus others.
It does. Steve has another question for you.
Please.
Yeah, so I actually look at this as another industrial revolution, because it changed everything in the Industrial Revolution, where people were craftsmen. They spent years in a guild learning how to do something. And Power Apps is sort of that way, like learning how to do Power Apps. And all of a sudden now I can do it in an hour as opposed to 2 days, using AI and using ChatGPT or using clever different ways. And that's where I think we have to really kind of look at this. The whole dynamic of industry is going to change, and you're either going to change with it or you're going to be left behind.
Yes, you could argue a 2-person, lights off factory can produce and make as much money as a 20-person organization. So you can argue it that way, or you can do what I prefer, and it sounds like you're on the same page. You could instead be just making, in terms of impact and production and specialization, personalization, whatever, that much more money, because your stuff is higher quality, because you have got those, 23 people in that example doing other things, right? That drive market, that drive lifestyle, that drive, SaaS services that support whatever your product is after purchase, and, deliver more value, right? Through that model. So yeah, it is a shift, and we can always see it in hindsight. So there's no one who would say, oh, the cloud didn't change how we do, you pick it, research, whatever, pick a random substrate of something that people do. It's changed it, but we never imagined 10, 15 years ago that everyone would be using, the cloud to do research, that customers would be building Azure services, today. Like business customers internally, right, within an organization are building these services and stuff. That's happening, whether it's low code or whether it's solutions like that, because especially now with AI, because organizations and the industry has created new opportunities, and that's the only way to tackle those is with people. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense and realigns that too.
Yeah, I mean, even in the early days of the industrial revolution, businesses took advantage of, capital and employees, but it came down to really about quality in the end and government intervention by regulation to a certain extent. And then we kind of went through a really good period of working, and so it's going to be, I think, rough in the beginning until businesses adapt and the cream rises to the top. It'll take a little time, but we'll get there.
So I'll wrap it with this concept because I like to be very positive, and I know sometimes this stuff can be very jarring. And I could give you all sorts of data points. When the industrial era happened, we valued physical prowess in families and social dynamics, and definitely in the workplace. It was very important. Lots of people made a lot of money from it. And then as machines could do it cheaper, faster, and better, we devalued that. And what's happening right now is and that was hard to go through over a generation. Now what we're seeing is that's happening much faster with the devaluing of intellectual prowess. So if you identify like an intellectual, like I have historically done, it's a hard transition to realize that machines can do it smarter, faster, and cheaper, faster, and better than you or I can. And that's a challenging thing societally. That's a challenging thing within organizations to go through, but it is the reality. Now, here's the way I would look at it very positively. We don't think of strength as just physical prowess, right? We value all forms of strength. And we don't value, what you know. We value why you know what you know. We value how you know what you know. And that's really important as well. And so there are changes in dynamics, and there's some things that remain important: relationships, our intent, intent to do good, our positive intent, a bunch of other things. Those are really good, positive things that sometimes get co-opted, but generally speaking, we can be resilient with, and that uplifts everything and makes it better. And so there is lots of ways to frame things either individually, as a department or even as a business, I think in a positive way. And I want to stress, I have it in a different deck, but we all talk about security with Copilot in these AI systems, but insecurity is a real concern as well. And you have to tackle that head on. So comms needs to lead the discussion on how to think about, feel about, and work through these AI transformations during that, with obviously leadership support and a bunch of other factors. But again, it's a really important thing. So with that, let me just wrap this section, and then please keep going with the questions as we kind of dive into examples in this next one. So AI is changing communication without a doubt, and it's changing it over years, not decades. But if we embrace it sooner, we'll be better off. And that's the key. Right now, the challenge is if you wait, it's much more expensive and more challenging. I'll readdress this at the end if we have time. So then what's the proven approach, right? Like, how do we do this? How do we start to bridge this expectation divide and use AI to do that? And so I've got a bunch of examples today for you, and I'm going to use, again, a really simple structure where I basically talk about the technological environment of your employee experience, and I'm mainly going to focus on employee communications. So many of you have seen these types of icons before. These are the logos of different Microsoft products in Microsoft 365. And many of these products support improved communications. But if you're clever and you've looked carefully, you'll see things like Viva Topics, which is discontinued, like as of this year. You'll see changes. Those have become Copilot. Yay, Copilot. And this other thing down here is actually called virtual agents, and that is now Copilot Studio and the various Copilot experiences, Copilot agents, and so on and so forth. So what are we saying? We're saying the communication landscape changes, but I will say most organizations only think of employee communications technology in Microsoft 365 as email and SharePoint, and maybe a little bit of Teams. And that's the mistake. We want to look at a lot of these other things and understand it. Even something, which I won't go into detail today, like how Viva Learning could work, where Bring Your Own Learning allows you to use learning as a way to increase communication, alignment, and other factors that communication tries to drive. So there's different ways to use the tools within your tool set from Microsoft, and I think all of them are relevant. So I've picked a couple examples today. The first one is Viva Connections, really obvious one, brings the intranet into the flow of your work, right? So we've got it in mobile here. This is a Teams app. In my Teams app, I've got my dashboard for my intranet. I've got my news feeds, and then of course I have my instant messages all together. Another really common example, I've got my Viva Connections app, or whatever you rename it to, in my left rail of my Teams experience. It brings the full SharePoint experience into that. It looks pretty much identical to what we would have online. And this has become more and more true. There's one or two web parts that are still problematic, but generally speaking, they have continued to close this gap. So it really does feel like the same experience. Now, why is this important? Because this enables often other opportunities to create richer integration, and we'll talk through some of them today. So the first thing is every organization should be using Viva Connections if you have an intranet that's SharePoint based. The second thing to talk about is what's in Viva Connections. So Viva Connections has this thing called the dashboard, and the dashboard itself has different ways that AI can be infused into it. So again, what are the basics of the dashboard? You can click on these. You have what's called a quick view. These can be audience targeted cards. We can have different dashboards for different major groups within an organization if you have a very large enterprise. These dashboard cards can be built very easily, and there are many, many third parties that have pre-built dashboard components, so Workday, ServiceNow, and a number of others. And this is really beneficial because if you look at the 1,900 plus applications that are pre-integrated with Microsoft Teams, a good chunk of them have pathways in which you can surface them within the intranet without paying for new money. You essentially already own that enterprise service agreement with that SaaS provider, and that gives you the right to use these components within your intranet. So this is a really big win for many organizations, and the reason I always highlight it is because those other tools also have AI infused in them, and so the more we can kind of connect those dots, the more we benefit from that. And again, the intranet's about bringing the services and content to you in the flow of your work, so this also needs to be in that mobile and also Teams experience. Here's a good example of using AI yourself, really easy. I tried to pick stuff that's public. Of course, we build a lot of solutions like this for customers, but let's take the most liked pages instead of just having there's an out-of-the-box news control Microsoft has, which is just showing recent news or news recommended for you. Instead, you could do things like, okay, based on interactions, what are those, and then show those pages. And so that can become a really useful idea of a card. One of these dashboard cards. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the right solution for you. I'm just saying there's lots of ways that you can use the graph, a little bit of logic, a little bit of AI, quote unquote, to improve the employee experience for your intranets. And so this is a good example because you can go download it yourself and try, and its full code is provided in this community solution, so you can kind of see how they built it and come up with your own ideas based on something kind of similar. All right, so that's my first example. The other one I wanted to talk about is this algorithmic feed called Viva Connections feed. So we already have news rollups. We also have capabilities in various other places, which I'll talk about. But this particular feed has a few things going for it. We like to describe it often as a me feed, because unlike other feeds, other news rollups where you control exactly what's shown in what time, in this one, you can only boost. So you can boost something, which increases the likelihood, in fact, it pretty much guarantees someone's going to see it within their feed, but the rest of it will be based on activity. So in our organization, as an example, we do these project summaries, which are news articles, just how we've done it. And so some employee on my team that I work with a lot will like something, and even though I don't really go to the PMO site, it will show up in my feed and it'll say that person liked it, and that's why it's recommending it to me in my feed. So think of this as an algorithmic based feed that's kind of recommending things to you. So less control, but again, very AI infused. Now, Microsoft has provided the ability to boost for a specific time frame. And again, the goal is to eventually improve the ways that you can boost this so that we can provide richer behavior-based activity. So a good example that's released in product today is when you go, let's take that PMO site. A few years ago, I went to it's literally almost a year and a half ago, I went to the PMO site. I hadn't been to it. I've been at Thule for 10 years. I hadn't been to it for at least 6 years before that. And so I never knew we had news there. And I didn't go to read news. We had these intranet toolkits, and I was looking at some of those resources. So I went and looked at those resources, added some notes, left that. And then that week, I got this email from SharePoint that says, what you might have missed. And it had these project summaries, which I didn't know we did. And I found them really interesting. So I'm clicking on them and I'm reading them, through my email, because I live and breathe in Outlook. And so I'm going through that experience. Now, because I did that, that reinforced to this algorithm. And now, to this day, it still recommends and shows me what I may have missed, or in that newsfeed I just showed you earlier, it shows me those posts from the PMO site. And that's important. It's my behavior, me going to that site, that triggered in the first place that it would show that, and then my continued behavior continues to tune or calibrate it so it continues to show me that content. And I think the emails you may have missed, or sorry, pages, news you may have missed, sorry, from SharePoint is a good example of that in product. And something that they've illustrated multiple times is these improvements to Boost, which you see here with like, once it's viewed, do we get rid of it? Or if you viewed it X times, but you never clicked on it, maybe we get rid of it then. Those types of ideas align with that kind of thinking. I'll skip over that. And so one last thing on this particular theme, I've got it, I think, a little bit later, but I'm just going to highlight it here. Another thing to think about for this feed concept is how you combine it with traditional models. So a lot of organizations might have things like news, right? But what if you created, instead of the view all or see all news, you created news dashboard pages like this. So you use, this is a highlighted content web part. So we have trending news, we have most popular news, we have news. If you don't know this, you can bookmark news out of the box, and then you can have this web part that allows you to see what you've saved. And then you have the traditional news roll up, and then we have, again, news recommended for you. So this is the Viva Connections one. See, Ken will Kipple like this. That's why I'm seeing it. But you can see on this really simple example, we don't have to stay to, one paradigm or pattern. We can create any kind of landing page or experience we want that's personalized, contextualized, and there's a lot of tools in our toolkit in Microsoft SharePoint that allow for this. So I really would encourage, I think, again, more organizations to take full advantage of these types of capabilities. And I think an example like a news center, event center, policy center, those types of models, this is a really common one. Again, dynamic pages with things like trending, most popular, very easy to configure out of the box, and can make a difference in how we perceive the way these experiences work. And again, just to finish this thought, there's another web part that's really underutilized. It's called the Microsoft 365 feed web part. And this shows signals from email, shows signals from Stream, Outlook, all sorts of places. And I find it really helpful. Every time I've ever demoed it, I'm not doing it here because it's too risky, but it'll be like a statement of work I need to look at that day. It'll be like a meeting I missed between some colleagues that was recorded. It's always showing me really relevant content. And again, it's an out-of-the-box algorithmic web part that integrates across everything. What do we want? We want communication to be integrated, to come to us in the flow of our work, and we want to have it be personalized. And you actually have a great example of control that's really underutilized here, representing that. Of course, same idea, you can do that with Viva Engage, the way you can kind of have highlights based on what's relevant for you. You can also think of like the SharePoint home. Now the SharePoint home or start page has changed, which is really exciting. I really like how they changed it, where it now has this ability where you can have like a page, you can create pages, draft them, and then publish them from a central place in SharePoint, which is kind of neat, kind of like a Viva Amplify Lite experience. And so that is a big deal, but it also has a lot of kind of behavior-based content. So it has things like recent sites you went to, this idea of like trending and other types of things. What is that called? Where it's a popular and recent, like a combination of the two. You have things you follow. So if you bookmark it, just like those pages that I mentioned earlier, there's ways to bookmark sites, and then you can follow them basically and get back to them. Save for later. This feed here that you see for news, this is again that algorithmic roll up of news from different sites that you recently visited or actively participate in. So it uses those signals to then surface this information. Now, do people go to the SharePoint homepage? No, but I'm just highlighting that there are tools like this in the platform. So the more you can bring this to a user in the flow of their work, the better. So should we add there's a sites roll up that you can do out of the box on your intranet? Absolutely. Great example. Then you can show the sites they're following as well as recent. And by the way, recent doesn't just show the site, it shows like the last document you're working on, right? And allows you to just click there and jump to it, or something trending in that resource or that location. So those are all really useful navigation aids. And again, one more example. If you go to the Microsoft 365 home, which no one does again, but there's even things like the feed. So on the app rail launcher, you can do things like look at your feed. This is also in the Viva Connections experience under feed. And so this is like that aggregate feed that shows you what's been going on across Microsoft 365, how people have been working. And then there's a similar one that, again, is like the Viva Connections feed that aggregates signals from Viva Engage, SharePoint, and places like that. So a lot of different ways. And then of course you can go custom. If you wanted to still build these experiences, you still have SPFX controls, you still have ways in which you can build this. We still do this today. There are still customers that build, various experiences that improve things, but it's definitely much less. Like I would say maybe 10% of the organizations that, 5 years ago would do this now still do this. So keep in mind, out of the box does a lot. You really need to avoid custom where you can. All right, talking myself out of work. And then lastly, if we kind of look at this in a different way, all we've really done is we've touched the surface on ways you can use Viva Connections, ways you can use lightly Teams and SharePoint. There's so much more to talk about in this visual alone. So I'll pause here actually before I dive into directories and other experiences. Any questions or comments from the group on that? Awesome.
Bueller.
All right. You guys just make noise if someone comes up with something. So let's move on. Let's talk about sprawl, right? What happens is we have site after site, page after page, more and more content being created. How do we navigate that? Well, there's literally site sprawl. There's the issue of many sites, many locations, and one of the biggest problems for that is how do we navigate across them? So there's a lot of different tools you have in your organization that you can use to improve this. Obviously, one of them is the mega menu. And you may not think of this as comms related, but it is because, again, what we're doing is we're helping people find what they're looking for and communicating across these different modalities. So what we want to do is maybe think about how we can improve that. One of the things I've always hated is these landing pages that are just table of content style pages. We've all seen them. They have a bunch of, images and a link, image and a link, image and a link. Most of those can be lifted into the top nav. You have mega menus. You can do that with out of the box, or you can use a really simple customization or third party to create that experience. So consider if there's a way you can reduce those landing pages, it is 100% worth it. So that landing pages, instead of being table of content style link pages, are dashboards. So instead of that, they actually are these representations of what's going on within that space. So I go to the HR one, I see various HR spaces. I see the most recent documents across all the various department equals HR sites and locations, and so on and so forth. I see policies for me. Those kinds of dashboard-like experiences is what we want to emphasize versus traditional landing pages. So that's my Intranet 101 element. The other part of this story is that while the top navigation is powerful, it's not going to meet all your navigation needs. So the other way to look at this is today, it's still the most simple solution is always best. So a directory can be out of the box lists, can be like a SharePoint list. It can be something like this SPFX control. You can use a third party. There's a lot of them out there that have these experiences, but having some place where you can just see all the digital spaces and navigate them makes a big difference. A lot of organizations we come to have these information architectures and teams that are built with these hierarchies because that's how people navigate. But that's not the best way to design teams. You want teams to be flatter. And so there's a lot of things that are driven for the wrong reasons in terms of information architecture, which drives issues on fragmentation of communication. It drives concerns around navigation and much more. So one tool in your tool belt, however you do it, should be some sort of digital workplace directory. And this is a really easy problem to solve. One last comment, because I don't have time to get into detail, but I will say if you want to improve governance, this is the secret sauce. Why? Because when people see that they their site or their team or their Viva community or whatever doesn't show up within here under that department, or they go to that department page and it doesn't show up in that little roll up section, that tells people like they go, hey, how come my content's not there? How come my site, my file share, my Confluence space, whatever it is, doesn't need to be SharePoint or Microsoft 365 centric. How come that's not showing up there? They say, well, we didn't know it relates to department X, or we didn't know it relates to product or customers or whatever. And so then they can provide that information and update the directory. And by doing that, that will actually give you the metadata that empowers everything from compliance, think of labels and structures like that, to which spaces need attestation reviews because it relates to this product or this other thing. What if you know the department? Well, now even if you only have one owner, or you have owners that are unresponsive when you're doing something like an attestation or a renewal, you can just reach out to the department lead and you can say, hey, department lead, this is under your department. Can you help us figure out like who can answer these questions, because we want to archive it if you guys don't respond, and so on and so forth. So these are all things that we can do with a simple solution of a digital workplace directory. So really underutilized example again of an opportunity space. Another pattern is that people don't maximize the value of audience targeting. And audience targeting can be really powerful and again allows us to start to improve things like that personalization, helping people find the information that's relevant to them. The problem with audiences is you want to start with what we call additive audiences. So you have a new employee, 30 days. They're going to see nav links that only they see because they're new. They're going to see things like in the homepage, maybe a news article that's, remember how I said earlier, the news web part, you can kind of have something be at the top of the news feed. So maybe they see that news post, but everyone else doesn't because it's audience targeted to employees' first 30 days. Then when they go to 60 days or 90 days, they see different links, or the links slowly decrease, right? As an example, you have less of those guided links or links that guide you towards training or other types of onboarding experiences or support. And that's the idea, right? We want to slowly maybe reduce that, but additive audience targeting is always safe, generally speaking. The problem is when you restrict. So you go, you know what? I think this person works in this department, so let's make sure that they only see that department news. Or let's like reduce the noise and we'll do that for them. But that user doesn't know that those audiences are applied to them. And that's the problem with a lot of audience over engineering. So you have customers who don't use it at all, or you have customers who, instead of starting with additive and slowly working towards, filtering, using it in that way, you have customers that do it over engineered. And then because there's no signal data to tell you that it's not working or that people are missing information and links and resources and news and content that's relevant to them, you're missing out on that again. So you got to really think about audience design effectively here and the way you roll that out. All right, so let's pause there. And that basically gives us a quick introduction to these three. What I was going to do now is dive into Copilot head first, but again, I'll pause for any questions before I move on from traditional SharePoint and connection stuff.
Not so much a question as a statement. One thing you got to be careful about with using audiences, it is not security. It's something to allow you to deliver information to a specific audience. But the thing is, they can still get to that news document that might be geared directly to an audience for marketing, but you might be in your IT group. They still can get to that news article. It will be a little bit more difficult. It's just not being delivered on a platter. Perfect.
So on the AI front for comms, we want to think about how we use AI, and you're going to see a lot of Copilot here. There's lots of ways to think about it. These are probably the easiest ways. So if you're thinking about how do we use these generalized digital assistants, we typically think of it as accelerating and optimizing our comms, helping with summarization, research, intelligent recaps, or other types of review type exercises, tone awareness and messaging style, very, very useful exercise work, writing support, so literally just helping you improve writing, the efficacy of it, not just the targeting, like tone awareness and things like that, but like the comprehensiveness of it, its connection to other subjects, and then tons of suggestions, brainstorming, things like that. So these are the categories. We won't go through them all because we don't have time, but I'm going to call out a few key patterns. The first one is when we think of employee communication changing with AI, it's important to understand it's not just about this paid version of Copilot. So again, I will talk about this today, but a lot of people are surprised. First of all, this is enterprise data protection now, but a lot of people are surprised at how much value they can drive out of the free version of Copilot. And I like this for a few reasons. One, it's so much better to have this rolled out in organizations because it's safe to use and you don't have to worry about people putting sensitive, especially for comms scenarios, sensitive content into a third-party tool or maybe something that's a little bit less sanctioned by IT and a little bit more risky from an AI security perspective. So having people understand that they have this thing called Copilot in Microsoft experiences is worth starting at. And so that, just to kind of summarize, is when you go to copilot.microsoft.com and you see this web version, or you see the kind of non-work-based model, that has a lot of capability. Another way to think about it is if I take my browser experience over here, let me just go real quickly and pull it across, and I go into the right-hand side, it's in the Edge browser as well, right? So it contextualizes what you're looking at on the page, and then you can ask questions about it. I'll come back to that later, but there's a lot you can do with this. So let's say I have a PDF open in the browser and I look at that PDF. Well, you can summarize it and you can ask questions about it. You could take an email and do the same thing. There's a lot of things in the browser you can do that still contextualizes it. Now, it's not the same as the work experience. There's a reason people pay $30 per month per user. But it is important to note it's a really safe and easy way to get started. So I'm going to highlight that versus going through all the examples of it. And then I want to talk a little bit about this other experience, this Copilot for Microsoft 365. So this is a really simple visualization where we take some meeting notes, we take a product roadmap, we use that with a prompt to generate a proposal document that generates the proposal document. Then what we do is we take that proposal document that's partially generated, we do another exercise where we say, okay, make it look like this other document for formatting and styling. Then what we do is we grab images from another document and add it. So this is kind of the promise of Copilot. If you've used Copilot for Microsoft 365, you know that even though this was demonstrated in March 2023, you know that this is not actually how it works today. There's a lot to be desired here, but they are getting closer and closer to this vision. And in fact, this week on Monday, they did show new demos that are live and functional today that actually get really close to this vision. So again, we have to think about what are we trying to do? We're trying to close communication gaps. So why is this particular pattern important for that? Well, many people struggle to find the right way to present and communicate the work that they're doing. The hard work that everyone's generating in terms of value is often, they don't know how to use the thousands of commands in Word and PowerPoint to stylize it, to organize it, to make it work. A lot of people don't have the, we'll call it English or literary science background or whatever you want to call it, the ability to write really effectively, right? They need tools like this to help augment that so that, again, their ideas, their intents can be amplified, understood, and recognized by the other side. So what these tools really do is they allow us, whether it's the free version or it's this type of version, it allows us new ways to both access that capability in these products as well as improve the ways in which we can amplify our intent. In this, in particular example, creating more effective proposal material. And another way to look at this, and I've always liked this visual, and I still think it's relevant and accurate, you take something like a draft for communications or other types of patterns, and again, where we used to historically start without AI is we would start on that average quality, starting point. Often we'd copy. People don't even use templates. They copy another document and then they edit it, right, to kind of tune it for this scenario, and then they fill it in, right, with the new stuff. With AI, we can kind of skip ahead on some of those steps, and this is being delivered today. There's a number of ways that this is happening, and so that's a big opportunity, not just for productivity benefits, but it does lead to a consistent, improved quality on many of the things that we output. And we see that through evidence where, let's take the proposal example, we see higher win rates, we see customer satisfaction, or those who review the proposals saying they like the ones that are AI infused and supported, which often take less time and can be done, more tailored, more personalized to that audience, using the context of, I don't know, the RFP or something they created, and so on and so forth. So that's a really important distinction here. The other way to think about this, if that didn't really resonate, is that many people don't have SharePoint skills, right? Many people can't create SharePoint pages and sites, but by using, now we have it, SharePoint Copilot, people can now create sites and pages. And I think the way to think about this is twofold. One, yes, it's a sort of natural way to craft and quickly generate some text. Really, that's the main use case of it right now within a SharePoint page or site, and maintain and manage that, tuning it for different audiences and things like that. But I actually think there's something even more interesting about this. And we have seen this with customers who are using, SharePoint Copilot experiences. So what we're seeing is people are really using it to take an existing artifact. Let's say like you have a sales handbook, okay, and that's like a PDF. You take that and you convert it to a series of pages, not because you're a SharePoint expert, but because you've never done that before. You want that because now I can answer questions like, which parts of the sales handbook are most popular? So I can spend more time updating those sections versus all of the sales handbook. And I can see which ones are more popular with salespeople, and I can see which ones are more popular with other people in the organization, supply and partnerships and whatever other groups. So this becomes a really valuable way to kind of do this anything to anything, where we take, in this case, a very textual artifact, typically like a PDF or a Word document or something like that, and we convert it into pages. And most people on this call, in this community, the value of SharePoint, but again, lots of people just haven't been exposed to or used it. So we see increased number of pages, not because of this just new SharePoint home experience where everyone can just create pages easily, but because we're seeing more and more people having access to some of these SharePoint skills through this. Now, it still has a long way to go. I want to be clear. We're going to wait probably till middle of next year before you see what I'd like to see for some of these capabilities. But it's certainly, progressing in a really positive direction here. And I think that, again, this means that we can start to address some of these gaps. Now, there's another piece to this, which is, again, how do you use it for editing? So not only can you create these spaces in this way, but then really optimizing them over time. Again, where it is today is more things like I want to rechange this section, but even that has a really big impact. And that, along with the designer, if you've seen the new designer for SharePoint on the new pages, that's both good examples of doing this type of capability. Or if you're familiar with PowerPoint, you prefer that, the way you can generate PowerPoint content has greatly improved. As of Monday, we can now talk about the new experiences there. And so there's ways that you can both improve that as well as still improve using traditional things like PowerPoint Designer. So you can use kind of a blend of sort of AI tools that have been in the product for a while, as well as newer AI tools that are much more intent-based. Like you go and use them for a purpose to accelerate our work and drive productivity benefits. All right, so that's what I'm kind of highlighting there. The other big one here is Copilot Pages. So I have to talk about this because this was announced on Monday and is now public, so we can have a discussion. This is one of those things that is, it's loop-based. So if you've ever used Loop, it's a .loop file, actually. What this means is as I create different types of prompted scenarios in Copilot, maybe I'm doing some research, maybe I'm aggregating and preparing something. When I do that, I can, with one click, add it to a page. And these pages are these loop artifacts that are stored within the user context. So you have, it's this new container, kind of like OneDrive. So you have this container for you. And so when you leave the organization, that does mean IT needs to think about, what happens to this right when I leave? How do we deal with all these, I'm going to call them loops, but these Copilot pages people create. The reason this is relevant is because if you think it's interesting that more and more customers are creating SharePoint pages because of Copilot and SharePoint, you haven't seen anything compared to how many people are going to be creating these Copilot pages, because almost everything you do with Copilot, you're going to find reasons you might want to store it really quickly for future reference in a Copilot page. Think of it as, instead of that recent, if you've ever done Copilot prompts, you got the previous ones you've done, it's a long history. Now you can just take the best ones or the times you got what you wanted, and you start to store them in a place, which is very easy to share and collaborate with others. And so this is going to change a bit of the paradigm and how we think of AI workflows and AI collaboration, which is going to create a lot of these really information-rich and dense pages. Those pages are going to, of course, be indexed and very valuable for a lot of people. And then when you take that a step further, it is likely that many organizations are going to look at this as a knowledge-based opportunity, and by proxy, it becomes part of the communication discussion. So I'd love to say you don't have to worry about this, but I do think within a reasonable amount of time, this is going to be a core dominant pattern that's going to change your landscape if you're a heavy Copilot shop, if you have a lot of Copilot for Microsoft 365 licenses. Sorry.
Richard, quick
Microsoft 365 Copilot. Yeah, go for it.
Where are those Copilot pages stored today?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's an environment, like a environmental container for the user. So there's this really great article, let me pull it up for you guys, that came out right when they made the publication. And because I don't want to get in trouble for saying stuff I'm not allowed to. So this article is the best one to look at, and it does describe what happens when they create it, the IT admin controls. It's in the, if you've ever been to the Microsoft 365 Copilot blog in the community, that's where this article is. And it does break it down. The biggest thing to understand, in my opinion, is what happens when people leave the organization, because these are artifacts that are being created, and I think that's the thing to immediately think about. The rest of it, I'll let your organization kind of figure out the way you want to handle these SharePoint embedded containers. But generally speaking, there's a number of different ways you can automate this, and Microsoft has first-party tooling they're already working on for Q4 of this year to improve the experience around managing these things, including DLP, auditing, and things like that. And then third parties have already started to talk about how they're going to, I don't want to name ones because I don't want to get in trouble here, but like a lot of the third parties have already started to talk about how they're going to manage these. So yeah, if you've never rolled out Loop or you never really cared about it as an org, you're going to have to if you're a Copilot org, which every org, as we mentioned earlier, should be at this point. So awesome.
Richard, there was another question I totally missed in chat by Christine. Is that directory a component that can be purchased? Meaning the list of SharePoint.
So in a one-on-one or whatever, I can show you how to do it out of the box with lists. It's not complex because you can do roll-ups and all sorts of different ways to make that work. So you can get away with out of the box if you want. But there are multiple third parties that have typically the same companies that do provisioning. They create, enable you to template and build sites and manage requests and things like that. Some of them have directories for digital workplaces. So I tried so hard so far not to say any names, but I'll just pick one, and this is not favoritism, but AvePoint has a thing called My Hub, and they have a digital workplace directory as an example. And I'm just highlighting that because we're looking at Copilot pages, and now we think about ROT analysis and prep for Copilot. So a lot of these third-party products are always worth understanding, watching demos, getting familiar with. But I do think always, if you can get away with out of the box, or first party, you should do that first. So if you can go SharePoint Advanced Management instead of a third party for some of these governance patterns around sites, owners or attestations, or analyzing sites to find at-risk sites. There's some cool stuff in SharePoint Advanced Management for that uses AI. I would do that all first, or at least make sure you understand it all, and then as you kind of look at those gaps, those challenges, what's in roadmap, and you want to start addressing those, that's when you use third party. So that's my quick answer for the directory, but also, this sort of underlying discussion of, how do we enable AI and how do we kind of manage sprawl and some of those other considerations. Awesome. All right, guys, keep the questions coming. So one last comment I want to make here. I'm sure many of you have thought of or heard of multimodality. It's really important to not underestimate. I'm going to frame this as two things. One, anything to anything. So earlier we at least showed an example of a Word document or a PDF and converting into a series of pages in SharePoint. So that's an anything to anything scenario. You can also take obviously text and generate video. You can take video and generate text from it, like this, where you can ask questions and summarize it. So there's a lot of this capability out of the box. Clipchamp, a lot of people underestimate. Clipchamp has a lot of AI capabilities. It's built in. You probably own it, but don't realize it. Designer, right, is much, much more integrated now into all the Copilot experiences. Some really cool stuff there. So there's a lot of improvements here. The reason I mentioned multimodality, at the very beginning, there was a talk about voice recognition and data and all this other stuff. Remember that modalities like audio, video, things like that are on the horizon. So I'm not saying they're going to impact it now, but I do think that there's some really interesting patterns around communications that can allow us to leverage more of this kind of content. And I'm seeing a lot more creation of video artifacts within customers. I'm seeing a lot more sharing and broadcasting of video artifacts because they can be, value can be extracted so easily from them in different ways. So my favorite example of this is from a few years ago. We did this exercise with Stream where a large customer, lots of knowledge in people's heads. And what we were trying to do was, before people retire in general, just do these interviews. So we took a bunch of co-op students or interns. They went through and basically did interviews with all these very senior people about everything you can imagine, asking them questions, things like that. That was all recorded. That was all in Stream. At the time, they used these early stage models to rationalize that data. That same organization today, because they started on that journey, is now really doubled down on that. And so they have this really rich set of data because they've been doing these recordings for a long time, plus they record lots of meetings where they're looking at that for really interesting context and data that really helps fill the gaps in the organization around, those processes, or around, what the answer to a question is, or what the best practice is for something else. And so there's some really interesting opportunities when you delve into, again, not just the content that's text-based like Word and PowerPoint and things like that, but when you start to dig into some of these other formats. All right. So what are we basically saying? Maybe we can get rid of this Copilot, which used to be topics, and we won't talk about anymore. And we can talk about Stream, and Stream is a relevant workload. But I also want to talk about Amplify and Engage briefly. And this is going to be probably the fastest I've ever done it because I do want to keep this light. So there's two ways to think about these two sections, Engage and Amplify. The first one is that communication is never one motion. It's not like we just use one channel of communication. We don't just have an intranet. People still do newsletters and they still send email blasts. Many organizations have not embraced something like Viva Engage or Yammer before it. And here's the way I would think about it if you haven't. Q&A is the most powerful and underutilized capability within Viva Engage. So I'm not interested in who's hotter, Ryan Reynolds, Ryan Gosling, right, whoever. And if that's the top thing in your, or the perception at least some executives have on what enterprise social is, then let's skip that. Let's just talk about a content type in your organization that is underutilized and extremely valuable, which is questions and answers. Most of those times those are locked to one-on-one conversations, they're buried in emails, they're buried in documents. What we can do is we can surface those, and then we can create either seeded or we can, encourage and elicit questions and answers across the organization. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that, but that's a really big part of this. And the other big part of it is people really underutilize Teams. So they might use email and they might use intranets, and they might even use a little bit of Engage, but many don't use Teams to do communications, like to do push communication, to create engagement and other things. And I think that's a big opportunity miss. Same thing with Viva Goals or Viva Learning or other kinds of areas. Again, there's lots of ways that people underestimate how they can use, the workloads in Microsoft to drive better communication. All right, so let's talk about specifically Viva Engage briefly. So in Viva Engage, you've got communities, right? You've got storylines, you've got places in which people share different materials. And there's two types of individuals in an organization. You have leaders, lowercase l leaders or capital L leaders that you give Viva Engage Premium, let's say, to, and you assign them this capability where they can be in a leadership corner or representation. And then you have just everyone else in the org who has a storyline and, the ability to participate in communities. So why might we use something like this leaders? This is a premium example of Viva Engage. We would use this because AMA events are really powerful ways to seed those questions and answers across the organization. So these are easy to run. There's no risk because the way an AMA event can work is you can set it up so that no one sees the questions unless you approve the questions. So you can basically cherry pick the questions you're going to answer and then only share those. Now, anyone can comment, which is important, on the discussion, but they can't generate the content here. And so that means it's really great. The second reason this is great is it doesn't need to be live. I mean, I know we always champion live, but it's not like that executive is on a screen on a video doing this. It's or the leader. It's just people answering questions during that time period. And so again, this is really beneficial because there's different ways to scale. It takes a lot of the concern and caution away from it. It makes it a really accessible way to get started. And when you do this, what generates is a lot of these questions, again, about lowercase p processes, stuff that's often missing or hard to find across the organization. And what is comms about? Comms is about connecting content and services and the right information to the right people at the right time. And so AMA events can be a really critical part of this that's easy to get going with. And then once you establish that, or as I mentioned earlier, seed, like creating a Q&A community in the organization and putting a bunch of questions in there, once you do that, you can also empower people with answers. Now, again, you don't need to use the Viva Engage Premium capabilities to benefit from Q&A, right? But if you did use it, there's some additional advantages here. So one example of this is, of course, every question and answer series in Viva Engage has upvoting, has marked as best answers, has concepts like that. But in the answers experience, what you'll get is things like when you are writing a question, kind of like if you're like me and you go to send an email and it goes, hey, you might have forgotten an attachment. And I go, oh, you're so smart. And I get 10 times smarter every time I click send. I'm always smarter after I click send on an email. It's the same thing here. Every time we write a question, what's the first response? Can you tell me more? Can you tell me a little bit more? And so it can give those prompts to the person when they're writing the question. Another example is they can write the question. As they're writing the question, it might say, hey, there's a bunch of related questions. Are any of these relevant? And then that also can be, even if it's not the answer you're looking for, you can connect it. You can say, these are related questions. They didn't answer my question. Why is this helpful? Because now we're connecting questions, which means when someone looks up something else later, they can kind of navigate across questions. My favorite announcement, which is super easy to miss, the Viva Engage questions and answers has nothing to do with premium. You don't have to have the CNC license, or it's called Viva Communities and Communication. You don't have to have those advanced licenses of $2 per user per month. You can just have those questions in Viva Engage surface and Copilot results. So you're asking Copilot a question, it doesn't know it. What's it going to do in December? It's going to probably say, hey, I think I found a question and answer in the org that seems like it might answer your question. So Q&A is the way to think about. Unfortunately or fortunately, I really think it's the most underutilized part of Viva Engage, and it's the right way to frame it for a lot of leaders. And why is all this relevant? Because if you're a comms department or leader who thinks of editing and publishing, then you don't feel like you have a participation role here. You don't feel like it's important for you. And that's the difference between, I would argue, a more proactive, progressive, and higher budget comms group versus one that's not, or HR if you're a smaller org and you don't have that differentiation. There's other reasons this is really beneficial, like suggesting who might know the answer to the question and giving them notifications, or just in general, the way these, again, bridge notification gaps across Teams, email, all these other places. If you've never used Viva Engage, you can do everything in Viva Engage from email. I don't, I'll be completely transparent. I do not go to Viva Engage. Everything I do in Viva Engage is through email because I live in email. I really do. To this day, it's the number one tool for me is Outlook. My number two tool is Teams. Everyone's got their own ecosystem, but the idea is this means that anyone can be a participant. If I can, and I can live and breathe in Outlook, then anyone can. So that's really a big advantage that Viva Engage has. All right, so we've talked through that. The other big thing to consider here is how you might use it to create more content in new and innovative ways. So one of the big challenges with contributions is that people don't know where to post it. Is it relevant? Is it, important? And so one of the things we've seen is by using storylines, people feel more free to share that because you don't have to worry about it. Only people who will follow you will see it. And that makes people feel more confident sharing. But another big thing that drives this is knowing how to share. Not everyone knows how to contribute or understand or, what good social design is and how to write, effective posts. And so having AI assist you in writing the post and improving it is important. It's still your ideas. It's your intent. I'm trying to create a post about this. Help me do that. I'm trying to do this. It might even give suggestions. Hey, this is a trending topic. Do you have an opinion here? And then you give the opinion and then it helps you rewrite it so that it doesn't just communicate more effectively, but so that it can be connected to other concepts. So it can have imagery and things like that, but especially this connection thing. So you can see here in a second, after we add this image, we can do things like connect it to other posts, subjects, and ideas in the organization. And so that ability to create that connection between content is going to, again, really improve journeys for, navigation, learning, discovery, knowledge, and of course, communication. So why is this important? Because you can create articles in Viva Engage today, which are basically pages. You can create really comprehensive experiences in here, and it has slowly replaced the traditional leadership corner that you'd see in something like SharePoint from many organizations. One of the reasons for that is because it has analytics experiences that are a little bit more robust and gives you more designed for comms and engagement scenarios based in those analytics. Again, some of these are premium features, but it's an important thing to understand directionally where this is going and how to take advantage of it. Again, $2 per user per month is a lot cheaper than $30 per user per month, which gives you the same capabilities we've talked about: Viva Answers, the Copilot and AI stuff there, Copilot for creation of these posts, and more. And again, these show up in feeds. So if you look at something like the feed that's in Connections, I'm not saying you should use this out of the box Connections experience, by the way. I think you should, redirect it to SharePoint, but whatever. There are lots of these types of feeds and experiences. So again, that news for me, that Viva Connections newsfeed that you put into SharePoint is the same as you see here. So that becomes, again, a really great way to create visibility around things like these Viva Engage storylines. But that brings up another question. How do we make sure as comms people, the right people get these messages? Well, if it's a leader, we want to make sure when they put something out there that all the people in their department maybe get that message. So one of the things you pay for that advanced license, that $2, and you don't have to do this for everyone, just the leaders. Again, lowercase l leaders or capital leaders, you want to have these advanced functions of AMAs and things like that. One of the things you can do is if you add them like that, you can actually add the people who are their following connections. And this really helps because then it increases the likelihood they're going to see it. They'll see those signals within their feeds, which means it shows up in email, which means it shows up in Teams activity feed, which means it shows up in SharePoint through those connection feeds and a variety of other sources. So again, visibility is not an issue here. Integration's pre-built, and we have a new way in which we can distribute ideas and share. If you're not familiar with this, in Viva Engage, you can even have those leaders who have their audiences override. Again, great power comes great responsibility. You can have them override people's preferences. Let's say people have unsubscribed from notifications from Viva Engage. I don't care. I can still push it out to them. So there's all sorts of ways that you can really control this. And this isn't Amplify. This is just Viva Engage and Viva Engage Premium capabilities. Now, Amplify takes this a step further. What that's doing is allowing us to distribute across different channels in a more designed way. Like think of more campaign-based design where we create, constant content for a particular outcome. And then we want to track specifically the analytics is probably the biggest driver here. We want to look at the analytics and the performance of that campaign to tune it, to calibrate, to find better ways to communicate next time or in the next wave of this, especially for things that are recurring campaigns, things like that. That's important because all that stuff we talked about for Copilot in authoring things like SharePoint content and things like that, that will apply in Amplify as well in December. So this means we get the power of Amplify to do cross-channel distribution. So if you've never seen that, I'll click through these, but you'll be able to see them in the slides after. So you can go create a campaign, establish the content for the campaign, distribute it to different audiences, report on that campaign, design it for different audiences. So you can really design it. What does it look like in email? What does it look like in SharePoint? What's it going to look like in Teams? Like really get, granular with how you lay this out and structure it, who you're targeting, who's going to see it, when they see it, scheduling, all that stuff. So you can get really, one of my favorite examples of this is there's a pre-built Amplify campaign for Copilot, like a Copilot rollout. And it shows you different ways that you can use those channels, right, with different staggered techniques and things like that. And when you do all of this, right, you do all this and you publish it through this model, then your analytics are now aggregated as well. So again, I'll skip over the approvals and all the cool stuff that you have there. But the big difference here is unlike, say, SharePoint, where you have to look at each individual location or piece of content, here what we can do is we can aggregate across that campaign. So we have multiple publications. Each publication has different types of reporting that'll tell me how it's performing. And then as I kind of dig into each of these different reports, I can get more and more granular detail about, how that particular report publication is performing. So we can dig into maybe the response rate was most favorable on this one communication site, and so we should publish there more often with this type of content. And it's okay. Duplication is okay if we have good management control, we have good roll-ups, we have good targeting, a bunch of other things that will improve it. All right. So that was me, whirlwind tour of Engage and Amplify. And so with that, I'm going to start wrapping up what I had intended today. But again, just keep the conversation coming. And I'll just summarize a few of these sections for you that I put in here. And this is really food for thought. The first one that I mentioned earlier is this idea of using the free version of Copilot. I cannot express this enough. It is very powerful. And the benefit of this is when you click new, it's gone forever. So you can have really private discussions and lots of ways people can use this with no risk. So that's the free version of Copilot. The second one is that as of Monday, we now know they're called Copilot agents in SharePoint. But Copilot agents in SharePoint also allows people to take existing sites, great content you've created, like this drone launch site, and then we can make it into a Copilot experience by just selecting a few documents or folders of documents, clicking on Create Copilot. It generates the Copilot. We essentially validate our sources, maybe add in other sources from other sites, etc. We maybe design a few starter prompts. And when we do that, we now have this Copilot that's pre-built that's easy to share. This actually creates a .copilot file that you can easily share from SharePoint. It has permissions, so you can have the individual files, of course, are permissioned as always, but then you have the Copilot itself can be permissioned and shared. And so, yeah, that makes it so you can go to like the intranet site and ask questions. So this makes sense, right? If you go to an intranet site about, all of our IT projects and you want to ask questions about them, we might have a nice summary where we've aggregated the key content from those, like status reports, etc. And you just ask questions. Or what we can do is, let's take this a step further. You can take that and share that into places like Teams, active places where you might want to mention it and ask it questions. So things like this can make a big difference because end users can do it. And because of that, we are unlocking more value from our content. And again, these are forms of communication. Traditionally, people would do email blasts. They would, do all sorts of reach outs to help people understand what's there. And they themselves would be inundated with questions that they'd have to respond to. This offsets quite a bit of that. And most importantly, all the signal for the questions people are asking is captured so we can optimize the content that we're creating. Essentially, we can optimize our communication. So there's some really cool stuff there. Of course, you can take this and extend it to Copilot Studio. I'm going to skip over this other stuff, but I just wanted to also highlight, if you've never used Microsoft Clarity, you can add that to your intranet sites, right? It's really easy to do. And then with that, by the way, it has a Copilot capability. So you can actually ask it questions about like how performance and, what are people navigating to and how's the journeys for users like. So some really cool stuff there. It's all free. Another example is SharePoint Premium, which can be used to aggregate and create better content attribution. So you can extract key insights from different documents and then use that to improve stuff. Don't worry, I've got some videos and stuff embedded for you guys in the slides there. And then when you do all that, you can think of new scenarios. So let's say a scenario with SharePoint Premium would be something like an improved policy and procedure hub where you use that capability. Why is this important? Because Copilot, you have to tell it what to do. This is automatically doing it on your behalf. Same thing with let's say you have an external communication. You're communicating to suppliers. And so how do we do that today? Oh, we do all these different steps in the process. What if we could automate elements of that process? So when you make a change to a funding program, then all of the partners who qualify for that funding program automatically get an email that looks like X or Y. If a funding bucket is dried up and there's no more funding, it can automate an email to those different parties saying that this has changed. Or similarly, you have suppliers and you need more of X. You could say within this time frame, if you respond to this with this price point, we will just buy what you're asking for, and so on and so forth. So you can do all sorts of different tactics using these types of automations. So it's not limited to just internal, but it can be like an internal external mix. All right. And I'll skip over all the image stuff. And last thing I'm just going to highlight for you guys as a leave behind, there's a set of slides right after these comms ones where it kind of walks you through common use cases for Copilot and comms. And I think these are good slides. So I'm just going to leave them in there for reference. So different KPIs to think about, that communications has improved. There's a marked impact. And then different, day in the life type scenarios, flows throughs that you can do with Copilot to improve communications. So like social media copy, media interviews, blog posts, internal comms posts, issues management manager, maybe like what their day might look like, things like that. I really encourage your organization to think about scenarios like this, not because you should just take Microsoft's, but because this is a really good way to frame how people derive value from something like Copilot. All right. So I'm going to pause there because that was a whirlwind. Questions on that before I finish with like the final thoughts here?
Anyone?
Can you review again the licensing requirements for the SharePoint agents that you mentioned? Was that included or not?
I don't know if they've been public in this. So let me say what I believe is currently the current known identified public data on it. Copilot agents in SharePoint has not been finalized and can change before the release. There's a private preview in October, so things can still change. But the intention at this time is that if you have the $30 per user Copilot for Microsoft 365, or I guess it's now called Microsoft 365 Copilot license, that it should be included just like the SharePoint Copilot. Copilot in SharePoint. Such terrible names. The SharePoint and Copilot capabilities are currently included in that price, and so the assumption is that will continue. Now there are management capabilities and other things that are part of Copilot Studio, so there's some like asterisks there. And again, this may change. So that's my current understanding of it. But as I'm stating, I'm not officially making that judgment because Microsoft can and has the right to change that before they go live with that particular feature. Because it adds a lot of value. This idea of like extracting value and tuning and calibrating your own copilots based on various use cases internally. But I personally don't see how they can not make it a core functionality of Copilot because it's so tied to the value proposition of Copilot. So that's my thoughts. I think there's a lot of wind in that direction, but things can change. Great question. And again, there's some other things in here. This is designer's logo, SharePoint Premium we briefly talked about. There's no SharePoint Premium logo, so this is syntax. And there's a bunch of other things we could have talked about for comms, like even forms design is a really interesting one for feedback and different ways you can communicate through forms. So this is overwhelming. I always suggest start with your own individual productivity. There's a lot of examples I gave today where maybe you can just change a little bit of how you work or your department works with, Microsoft 365 communication patterns, use a little bit more AI, and then once you have Copilot for Microsoft 365, dig in a little bit more there. And if you do that, then once you understand it, then you can start to work with your department or team to understand it. And then once that happens, then you can start to transform the organization. But I think it's naive to assume that you can just understand it and then transform the whole org. You have to really kind of go through a step progression there. And that's why, again, sooner is better than later. You got to get started with this stuff as soon as possible. So this was the argument we made at the beginning. Is this possible, right? Can AI help? And look, AI could make this way worse, right? AI absolutely could make this much harder for us because now everyone's creating even more content and, everyone expects the world from AI and AI is not delivering it within the enterprise because there's different, privacy, there's different complexities within, memory and other concepts within an organization. But I do think right now, the belief is that it will probably help close this gap. And certainly if you don't invest in AI, if you're not adapting some of these patterns, you're absolutely going to fall further behind. Like this is going to get a much, much more pronounced change because the expectations are exponentially increasing as the capabilities of these AI models do. Think of it in a different way. There's near limitless ways in which AI can improve communication, right? And because there's near limitless numbers of ways it can improve it, that means that people have near limitless number of ways that they think it can help them. So we need to make sure we bridge that as soon as we can as an organization. Another way to look at it, I mentioned this earlier, just some slides for reference. When we talk about bridging this gap, you do it through a variety of different investments, employee experience, effective intranets, champion programs, communities, things like that. Absolutely, these help bridge. If you wait, the big problem is the longer you wait, like I said, the steeper that curve is. So those descriptions I mentioned earlier, you've got some nice visuals you can use, for these playbooks yourself. Just grab the slides and use them internally. You have my approval, please go for it, and just change it. Like, again, what is the risk that you see if we wait longer to start, embracing some of these newer paradigms for communication? Another way to look at it, you got maybe an intranet launch coming up, a new modernization. Love it. Would love to help you with that. When you go through that process and you've defined your program, right? Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to do Digital Workplace Directory. We're going to do Viva Amplify Pilot. We're going to go through all these different steps. Maybe think about how do we AIify this? So I'm literally saying, like, literally just AIify everything. What if it could be a Copilot directory? What if it could be, instead of Viva Engage Premium Pilot, it's a Viva Engage Premium Pilot with, CNC licensing and Copilot. What if it's Q&A, right? Within, it's called Answers in Viva, by the way. What if it's those types of advanced functions that we also do? So you really want to think about this as comprehensively as you can. And I find a lot of times when you talk with, like, again, a business leader, they're thinking of just the one project, or they're thinking of like a more legacy approach. And all you really do is you have to say, what if you could do some of these other things? And if you're not confident in it, Microsoft will fund a lot of that. If you're a larger customer, for sure, even smaller customers, 300 seats can often get it. So there's money right now for Copilot. If you do rollouts, you just have to do it with a partner. It doesn't need to be totally just a reliable partner that does this. And there's tons of support for things like we call it a leader standardized pilot, but it's the CNC pilot. It's this communications and communities $2 suite that gives you Viva Engage Premium, Viva Amplify, and some other benefits. So that those two both have funding from Microsoft and very proven practices and patterns. So you should be off in a good place if you kind of add these two things to your traditional internet plans or whatever else you might be working on. And that is what I came to share today outside of Q&A. So thanks for me going over and giving me your time and attention today.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard.
Happy to stick on if anyone has questions too. I don't know how I'm on time, so you guys lead me.
Yeah, well, I wake up my computer because it's like take a nap, or just drain the battery because I forgot to plug it in.
So I have one serious question for you, Richard.
Serious face on.
AIify a really word? Shouldn't it just be called AIify?
Is AI, what was it?
AIify, which is the one you use.
AIify? Did I say that? Yeah, it's not a real word.
It's not a real word.
It's totally not. Yeah, it's like findability. I'll put ability, findability, other terms. Look, I think we want to do two things. Today, we're in a foundational enablement phase for what we call digital assistants at scale. So you want to enable generalized digital assistants like Copilot. You want to do that for as many people in your organization as possible. And you want to do that because when you do that, other programs, other AI opportunities will be much easier for you to both land and expand. So if you take a project and you're trying to do, agent-based work in domain like sales or marketing or supply chain or something, right? Because there's every vendor and ecosystem has all these AI capabilities being built into those products. The problem there is when SAP adds all these AI components, everyone else who owns SAP, as long as they're using modern and adopting it, they go all up at the same time. So your competitive landscape, everyone kind of generally, I'm not saying there's certainly some leaders, but generally people kind of all get lifted. So the competitive difference isn't your what I call capital P processes. It's the lowercase p stuff. It's the way Microsoft 365 and modern work bridges between that ERP system and SAP, let's say, and the customer experience systems. It's that bridging that people do, and they do it with emails. They do it with Teams meetings. They do it with SharePoint and things like that we've talked about today. So we want to enable them with AI because one, the productivity and ROI that we found is much more pronounced there. It's easy to attain and it's very significant, so it pays for itself and by far. But the second reason is it means all those other projects that relate to AI are way cheaper and more effective. And I can go into lots of evidence chains for that, but that's really the idea. So kind of you're AI-ifying, but you're doing it in a very particular way. Generalized digital assistants, foundationally enable, and then scale across the organization, prioritize whenever you can that first. And then, of course, you're piloting and experimenting with these other AI patterns. But if you miss this bridge, then you're going to find you're paying for it in other ways. And they're pretty steep costs if you don't do that well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just checking on if anyone's asking a question online.
Just Christine said starting a CNC pilot next month. I love it. Christine, please, let's have a one-on-one. I'd love to share like a million templates and resources. Abuse my generosity. I really would like to share stuff. To help you out there. But no other questions I'm aware of online. I won't, Christine. It'll be nice to chat with you again.
If you want, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
sure.
All
All right. So again, thank you, Richard. I really appreciate you coming in last minute. Amazing topic as always. As much as I wanted to do the hand gestures, because I could have totally did it, it'd been distracting. So. All right, there we go. Perfect.
Okay.
So we have a call to for speakers. Let's think next one. Thank you. As I stated, where is it? Collab Days New England. That's happening. It's Friday, October 20th. Why does it feel off a week?
Yeah, it's 18th.
It is the 18th. Okay, it's a typo. That's what happens with sausage fingers. All right. Let's see.
At Ignite,
Yeah, Ignite's coming up.
I go back one, sorry.
Yeah, if you don't mind. So Ignite's coming up in November. The Power Platform's happening actually this week, today through Friday, I believe, if I remember correctly. And then, let's see here, Secure.
Yeah, that's where Dimitri is now, right?
Yeah, that's where Dimitri is right now. That's the reason for travel. Outside of that, let's go on to the next one. Perfect. There's a lot more. If you guys know of anything that we've missed, let us know either in the chat or just kind of email one of us. Like I said, Dimitri's not here, so I volunteer him. But anyways.
The AI conference here next Friday. That's the 26th. Yes.
Okay.
It was announced. Come back to me.
Okay.
Got it in mind.
Yeah, because we're about to get thrown out of here at 8 o'clock. So let's go. Let's go ahead into the next one. Let's see here. There's like so many resources. We're kind of blazing through this, but if you have any questions, definitely ask us. Next one. All right, related user groups in the area of Rhode Island, Granite State. Apparently, there's this guy with an afro that's Italian speaking at the Granite State next month. Let's see, Boston Azure, North Boston Azure, a lot of Azure in Boston. And then, of course, the Boston Power Apps and Power Automate user group as well. It's a really good one for those of you in the Power.
What's the topic for Granite State next week?
It's going to be an upgraded version of the Staples journey from literally greenfield all the way to tier 4 on the what do you call it, growth model.
All right. So the announcement I had was AI Community Conference.
Okay.
Technically, it's in the Cambridge. It's the Microsoft NERC, the research center.
Yep.
It's on September 27th, so it's a Friday week, and it's organized by the same guys as Collab Days New England. So.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Praxis.
Interesting. So that, yeah, so that's literally, what, 10, not, no, 8 days away.
8 days away, yeah.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Memorial Drive, Cambridge, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's see here. Any questions? Yes, no, 7 or maybe? 42? Okay, good. Next. All right, thanks again to our platinum sponsor for the food and drink, Turn Digital. Dimitri is actually at the platform, Power Platform conference right now. Thus, Bill and I kind of are trying to hold up the reins that he does so well. So again, thank you, Turn Digital.
Yeah.